Hello and welcome to Tonight on Bay TV. Swansea has such a rich and interesting history. I was joined at Swansea Castle by Professor Clarke, who teaches English at the University of Southampton. Catherine specialises in the culture of the Middle Ages, and she works with the City Witness Project, a project that uses testimonies and research methods to paint a picture of medieval Swansea. Catherine told us about Swansea's medieval mystery, our own hanged man, William Cragg.
So what would the language of this administration been? I mean, was it Welsh, like the local populace, or was it sort of the burgeoning Anglo-Norman language that was sort of developing at that time?
So that's another really good question, and we've got some really good clues from the manuscript which tells us the story of Swansea's hanged man, William Cragg, and that tells us what language all the different witnesses to those events spoke. And for example, Lady Mary de Brio's, the wife of the Marcher Lord, only spoke French, so the language of the Norman aristocracy, whereas William Cragg, the local rebel, only spoke Welsh and had to have interpreters in these proceedings. I kind of like the idea that maybe he could speak other languages, but he just wanted to speak his Welsh and stay true to his Gower roots. So lots of languages would have been heard in medieval Swansea: Anglo-Norman French, English, Welsh, and probably other languages from continental traders arriving here. We know that goods came into Swansea from across continental Europe as well.
Swansea Castle, obviously, it's quite destroyed now by the Blitz, but it had, during the time it was built and during the time where the de Brio's family lived here, there were some good attempts to take it down at the time, weren't there?
Yes, so we've talked about how Swansea was a site of Norman colonial rule in Wales, and obviously that wasn't popular. That was imposed external rule. It was empire being built here in Wales, and there were lots of rebellions here in the Middle Ages and wars led by local Welsh princes and Welsh rebels. And we know about one in particular because there's a wonderful story that survives in a medieval manuscript from early 14th century Swansea about the Welsh rebel William Cragg and events surrounding his capture and execution in Swansea.
So who was William Cragg?
Well, we know a bit about him. We know that he grew up in Llanryddion, and his mother and his father, his mother Swaneth and his father lived in Llanryddion, and he was involved in rebellion against the Anglo-Norman rulers. Now, of course, we have different perspectives in the manuscript. So the Normans tell us that he was a criminal and an outlaw, but of course Cragg would have seen himself as a freedom fighter, rebelling against this Norman colonial rule. We know that in 1287, William Cragg was involved in the burning of Oystermouth Castle, just along the road in Mumbles, and according to some reports, killing 13 men. And in 1290, William Cragg, along with another rebel, was captured, and he was held here in the dungeons of Swansea Castle.
So he was held here and presumably not for a short rehabilitation and then release.
No, they weren't good at rehabilitation in the Middle Ages.
No.
So he was held here before being taken to be hanged at Gibbet Hill. And the reason we know so much about this is because a really intriguing manuscript survives in the Vatican Library in Rome. The hanging of William Cragg was rather strange. Cragg was hanged, but he came back to life afterwards.
Okay.
So the Pope sent some inquisitors to investigate whether a miracle had been involved, whether Cragg had come back to life because of a miracle. So we've got really detailed records of what happened in this event. We know that the night before his hanging, William Cragg was held in the dungeon here with other men, but he'd done something secretly. He had bent a penny to St. Thomas of Hereford, so he'd folded a coin in half and hidden it in his pocket. And according to medieval belief, that was a way of asking St. Thomas of Hereford for help to intervene. On the morning of the hanging, Cragg was led out of the dungeon by John of Bagaham, the Lord's steward, and a posse of armed men. And a really cruel touch, I think, that shows the vengeance and vindictive power of the Anglo-Norman lord is that Cragg's own family were made to escort him up to the gibbet and were made to hang him. So a real statement there about punishment and vengeance against the local Welsh population. So Cragg was hanged up on Gibbet Hill, along with another prisoner, Traherne ap Howell. But during the hanging, the crossbeam of the gibbet broke and the men fell to the ground.
Well,
but they were hanged for a second time. And we have 9 medieval eyewitness accounts that tell us exactly what happened, and they give us very gory details about how they knew that William Cragg was definitely dead. But while William Cragg was hanging on the gibbet, we have another interesting bit of information about Lady Mary de Brios. So remember Lady Mary, she's the wife of the Anglo-Norman Lord William here in the castle. And while Cragg is being hanged, Lady Mary prays for Thomas of Hereford to intervene and help him.
Why would she have done that?
That's a great question. And the Vatican manuscript is only interested in whether there was a miracle and whether St. Thomas is a saint or not. There are lots of things that it's not interested in that we are, and it doesn't tell us about. So that question remains unanswered.
So would have Lady Mary been at the execution on Gibbet Hill, or should have been here in her chambers at the castle?
So both the Norman lord and lady were here in the castle. I think you can imagine tensions would have been running really high, and it was safer for them to be here. We know that Lord William and his stepson, Lord William Jr., watched the hanging directly from the first floor hall here. Lady Mary was enclosed in her chamber with her women, praying for Cragg's recovery and praying for the intervention of St. Thomas.
Because Cragg wasn't hanged for a third time after his miraculous recovery.
No.
And how long did it take for him to sort of come back to life and say what happened to him afterwards?
So the story is really strange. His body was brought down from Gibbet Hill. His friends tried to take him to the Chapel of St. John, a little way up the high street to the north of Swansea, which we think was probably a chapel that had links with the Welsh community. But they found it locked. I do wonder whether that was because the chapel was a bit anxious about being involved in these very politically sensitive events. And his body was taken to the house of a local Burgess, Thomas Matthews. And gradually, over the coming days, he began to recover. Lady Mary sent a maidservant to feed him almond milk, to nourish him and to help him. And gradually, he came back to life. We know that another bit of medieval devotional tradition played a role as well. Lady Mary sent her maid Sunahild to measure Cragg to St. Thomas. That sounds quite strange to us. What that meant was cutting a length of string, the same length as Cragg's body, that would be made into the wick of a candle to be left at the shrine of St. Thomas as a thank offering. So St. Thomas was invoked in lots of ways. Cragg came back to life. In the Middle Ages, this was understood as a miracle. There is one final twist though.
Yeah.
Cragg's miracle is in that manuscript in the Vatican, but in, if you like, the final draft of St. Thomas's miracles, Cragg's story doesn't make the grade. So obviously, even in the Middle Ages, there was a little bit of uncertainty about exactly what happened.
But given the politically charged time, obviously, and Wales still sort of being a bit of a dangerous area, could that have been because the miracle was Welsh, to a Welshman?
So you're right to think about this miracle or supposed miracle in the context of political tensions, and the papal inquisitors are very alert to that, and each of the witnesses are asked whether there could have been trickery involved or magic and other sort of tricks and incantations that saved William Cragg. Actually, I think the politics of this work in a slightly different way, that Thomas of Hereford is a Norman saint, and by having him save a local Welshman, and Lady Mary nourished the local Welshman back to life by spoon-feeding him this almond milk. It's again, I think, a sort of soft power statement of Norman reach into Wales.
Like I said earlier, he wasn't hanged for a third time. He lived for quite a while afterwards, and presumably he didn't rebel against the de Brios family again.
Yeah, so we don't know a great deal about what happened afterwards. We do know that William Cragg, together with Lord William de Brios and Lady Mary de Brios, went on pilgrimage to Hereford to the tomb of St. Thomas, which I always think must have been the most awkward road trip of all time, going on this trip with the people who hanged him. And Cragg also promised that he would go on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. It seems that probably he didn't. In 1307, some of the witnesses are under the impression that Cragg is long dead, but actually he's there to give his own testimony about what happened. So I suspect he laid low and kept a low profile after those events of 1290, but he didn't end up in the Holy Land.